For ARMY, moments don't always announce themselves loudly. Sometimes, the most meaningful shifts happen quietly, hidden in expressions, timing, and unspoken understanding. In 2026, one such moment involving Jungkook and Taehyung caught the attention of fans worldwide, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt deeply genuine. At first glance, it seemed like just another interaction. No grand stage effects, no rehearsed lines, no viral choreography. And yet, something about it lingered. Fans replayed it, slowed it down, discussed it, not out of obsession but out of recognition. Recognition that something had changed. Not in who Jungkook and Taehyung are, but in how clearly their growth could be seen. To understand why this moment resonated so strongly, you have to look beyond 2026 and back at the journey that led there. Jungkook and Taehyung debuted as teenagers, growing up under constant public attention. Every smile, every glance, every interaction was analyzed, sometimes celebrated, sometimes misunderstood. Over the years, ARMY watched them evolve, not just as performers but as individuals. They learned confidence. They learned restraint. They learned how to carry responsibility while still protecting parts of themselves. By 2026, both artists had already experienced solo projects, global recognition, and personal growth that comes from time away and return. That context matters. Because the moment that changed everything wasn't about nostalgia, it was about maturity. What stood out most to ARMY was how enforced the moment felt. There was no need to prove anything. No attempt to draw attention. It happened naturally, in a space where both Jungkook and Taehyung seemed comfortable being exactly who they are now. Fans noticed the ease, the calm, the mutual awareness. It wasn't about words. In fact, words would have been unnecessary. The power of the moment came from what wasn't said, from how they listened, from how they reacted, not as idols performing for a camera, but as people sharing space. ARMY has always been emotionally perceptive. Over the years, fans have learned to recognize when something is scripted and when something is sincere. And in 2026, sincerity stood out more than ever. Many fans described feeling a sense of warmth rather than excitement. Others mentioned feeling emotional without fully understanding why. That reaction alone speaks volumes. Because when a moment triggers emotion without spectacle, it usually means it touched something real. One important thing ARMY emphasized in discussions was that Jungkook and Taehyung didn't change in 2026. Instead, they revealed who they had become. There was confidence without arrogance, comfort without carelessness, presence without pressure. Fans who had followed them since the early days felt a sense of pride, not because of achievements, but because of how grounded they seemed. That's what made the moment powerful. In a world of constant content, silence can be the loudest message. This moment didn't rely on viral captions or dramatic edits. It relied on authenticity. ARMY noticed how neither Jungkook nor Taehyung tried to explain the moment afterward. There was no need to clarify. No statement required. And somehow, that made it even more meaningful. One of the most refreshing outcomes of this moment was the way ARMY discussed it. Instead of speculation or division, the conversation leaned toward respect. Fans talked about growth, about friendship, about shared history. There was an understanding that not every meaningful moment needs to be labeled or defined. Some things are valuable precisely because they exist without explanation. By 2026, Jungkook and Taehyung had experienced both distance and reunion, individuality and unity. That balance showed. The moment reflected years of trust, not something built overnight, but something maintained through time, change, and mutual respect. ARMY didn't see two idols trying to recreate the past. They saw two artists standing firmly in the present. Not all iconic moments are loud. Some are remembered because they made people pause. This was one of those moments. It reminded ARMY why they connected with Jungkook and Taehyung in the first place, not because of perfection, but because of sincerity. And in 2026, sincerity felt more powerful than ever. As conversations continued to unfold, one thing became increasingly clear. This moment wasn't powerful because of what it showed. It was powerful because of what it confirmed. For many ARMY, it validated years of quiet belief. The belief that behind the performances, schedules, and expectations, Jungkook and Taehyung had continued to grow in ways that were deeply human. And in 2026, that growth became visible in the most subtle, respectful way. Before this moment, fans often spoke about Jungkook and Taehyung through the lens of history, memories, iconic eras, and well-known dynamics. But after 2026, the tone shifted. ARMY began talking less about then and more about now. There was a collective realization that both artists had entered a new chapter, one defined not by youth or novelty, but by intention. The way they carried themselves, acknowledged each other, and shared space reflected something steadier, calmer, and more assured. It wasn't about reliving old memories. It was about recognizing present reality. In the fast-paced world of K-pop, maturity often goes unnoticed. Loud moments trend quickly, while quiet ones require patience. But ARMY noticed. They noticed the way Jungkook listened instead of reacting instantly. They noticed the way Taehyung responded with ease rather than performance. They noticed the absence of tension and the presence of mutual respect. This maturity resonated because it mirrored the growth of ARMY itself. Fans who had grown alongside BTS saw parts of their own journey reflected back at them. That shared growth created connection. One of the healthiest outcomes of this moment was the collective understanding that not everything needs to be defined. ARMY didn't demand explanations. They didn't push narratives. Instead, many chose to simply appreciate the moment for what it was. A moment of alignment. A moment of understanding. A moment of quiet strength. In an industry that often thrives on constant interpretation, this restraint felt refreshing. The impact of this moment wasn't measured in views or headlines. It was measured in emotion. Fans described feeling comforted, grounded, reassured. Some said it reminded them why they stayed with BTS through every chapter. Others said it renewed their trust, not just in Jungkook and Taehyung, but in the idea that authenticity can still exist at the highest level of fame. That kind of impact lasts longer than any viral trend. What made this moment believable was consistency. Jungkook and Taehyung didn't suddenly become different people in 2026. Their behavior aligned with everything fans had gradually observed over the years: the kindness, the thoughtfulness, the quiet support. Consistency builds trust. And trust is why ARMY felt safe embracing this moment without skepticism. There was also an undeniable sense of shared history woven into the moment. Years of working together. Years of learning each other's rhythms. Years of growing not just side by side, but individually. That history didn't need to be referenced aloud. It was already there, shaping every interaction. ARMY didn't see two people trying to prove closeness. They saw two people who no longer needed to. After 2026, conversations among fans felt different. Less urgency, less defensiveness, more appreciation. ARMY began focusing more on artistry, personal growth, and emotional health. The moment became a reminder that idols are allowed to evolve, to change pace, and to redefine what connection looks like over time. That shift mattered. Another key takeaway from this moment was respect for boundaries. Jungkook and Taehyung didn't overshare. They didn't invite interpretation. And in doing so, they modeled something powerful: confidence in privacy. ARMY responded in kind, by honoring that space. This mutual respect strengthened the bond between artists and fans, reinforcing trust rather than curiosity-driven speculation. Even as time passes, this moment continues to matter because it represents something rare. It represents stability in an industry built on constant motion. It represents calm in a culture driven by noise. It represents connection without pressure. For many ARMY, that's more meaningful than any performance. Looking back, fans often refer to this as a turning point, not because everything changed overnight, but because something settled. Expectations softened. Appreciation deepened. Understanding expanded. Jungkook and Taehyung didn't step into new roles. They simply stood firmly in who they had already become. And ARMY noticed. As time moved forward, the moment from 2026 didn't fade. It settled into memory. Not as a dramatic headline or a viral clip, but as a quiet reference point. A reminder of how much can be communicated without words and how deeply connection can be felt without explanation. For ARMY, this wasn't just a moment to remember, it became a moment to reflect on. After 2026, many fans realized they were watching Jungkook and Taehyung differently. There was less urgency to interpret and more willingness to observe. Instead of asking, "What does this mean?" ARMY began asking, "What does this show?" And what it showed was balance. Balance between individuality and shared history. Balance between visibility and privacy. Balance between past identity and present self. This shift in perspective felt natural, almost necessary. In an industry that constantly pushes reinvention, stability can feel revolutionary. Jungkook and Taehyung didn't need to redefine themselves loudly. Their confidence came from knowing who they were, where they stood, and how they chose to move forward. That stability offered comfort to fans who had followed their journey for years. It reassured ARMY that growth doesn't mean losing what made someone special, it means strengthening it. Many ARMY described this moment as feeling strangely personal, even though it wasn't meant to be. Not because it crossed boundaries, but because it reflected shared experience. Fans who had grown alongside BTS saw their own evolution mirrored back at them. The shift from intensity to understanding, from urgency to patience, from noise to meaning. That parallel made the moment resonate on a deeper level. Trust was at the center of everything. Trust between Jungkook and Taehyung. Trust in themselves. Trust in ARMY. By allowing the moment to exist without explanation, they trusted fans to understand without demanding more. And ARMY responded by honoring that trust. That mutual respect strengthened the bond in a way no statement ever could. The significance of this moment isn't limited to 2026. It sets a tone for the future, one where connection doesn't need to be proven, and where authenticity holds more value than spectacle. ARMY now watches with a different lens. A softer one. A wiser one. And Jungkook and Taehyung continue forward, not as symbols of the past, but as artists grounded in the present. History often remembers the loudest moments, but sometimes the quiet ones are the most transformative. This was a moment that didn't demand attention, it earned it. Not through surprise, not through drama, but through sincerity. Years from now, ARMY may not remember every detail, but they will remember how this moment made them feel. Calm, reassured, connected. It will remain a reminder that growth doesn't erase history, it deepens it. In 2026, Jungkook and Taehyung didn't change who they were. They simply allowed the world to see who they had already become. And for ARMY, that made all the difference. If this moment resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on what it meant to you. Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments, and continue supporting Jungkook and Taehyung in every chapter ahead. Thank you for being part of this journey.